This is an interview in the oral history series for the Space Archives at the University of Alabama in Huntsville. Today, February 1st, 2006, we have a daughter of Gerhard Reisig, Dr. Godela Reisig Iverson. We're pleased to have you with us.
Thank you very much.
To start, would you like to give a brief history of your father, where he was born, where he went to school, how he joined the von Braun rocket team, and his life and work in the United States?
Yes. My father was born in 1910 in Leipzig, Germany, on March 3rd. He grew up in Leipzig, went to elementary school there, and then went to the Nikolai-Schule, which is a private school, where he graduated from high school, and then went to Dresden for most of his university education, where he was at what they call the Technische Hochschule, which would be a technical university like Georgia Tech. He then went to work in Berlin for the Siemens company for a relatively short time. I think it was about 3 years. And about that time, von Braun and several other people were doing rocket testing in the Berlin area. And von Braun had been appointed a group of engineers to work with him at Peenemünde, and my father was invited to go with that group. And I don't know the exact year, but I think it was in the late 30s that the group formed in Peenemünde. And my father was actively involved, of course, in the technical aspects of what they were doing there. His specialty, kind of, that he had developed during his time at Siemens was measurements. And that's pretty much what he stayed with throughout his career with the rocket scientists. So he did measurements both pre and post flights, a lot of evaluations, and obviously was part of the intimate team of von Braun's. Then the war came. They had to leave Peenemünde, and the familiar story that many people know is that they were not exactly picked up. They actually went to the American military, and after negotiations, then they came to Texas in Fort Bliss and did their work at White Sands and Alamogordo. Then in the early 50s, there was a movement abroad to bring them to Huntsville, and I believe we came in 51, settled here, and I guess it was some time before the rocket business really took off here. But they always thought they were doing very important work. They were very proud of their work and worked hard, even if there wasn't a distinct mission at the time. And then, of course, in the space race with the Russians, things really took off, and they became very, very excited. I can remember that time. So then came the Apollo missions, the moon landing, and then things died down again after the space race was won. And then came the reductions in force, and my father, along with many of the other scientists, were let go in the early 70s. He always continued to work. I mean, he was in his study probably 12 hours a day, every day at his desk. He then got interested in meteorology, did things with birth and death rates in various parts of the country, and the lunar cycle in relation to birth rates and so forth. And then I would say in the 80s, started research for his book, which he wrote, and made many trips to Germany, where he did the majority of his research. Some of it was at Peenemünde. The majority of it probably was in Munich at the library there, and I do not know which one it was, but it was one of the major libraries in Munich. And then he started writing. He spent many, many years putting everything together, and his book then was not published until the mid-90s. And that was kind of the epitome of his career, getting that book published. He wanted to get it translated, started on a glossary of scientific terms, translated from the German into the English. Really had that finished, but never got around to getting the book translated, so it has not appeared in an English tradition, English translation rather. He then became ill and had a downhill course over probably his last 3 years or so, and just died about a year ago.
Were you with him in White Sands or New Mexico?
Yes, he came over in 45, and my sister and mother and I came over in 47.
All right.
So we lived there for 3 or 4 years before we moved to Huntsville.
Would you say his book was largely biographical, or is it more historical?
Well, it's interesting. It's a technical history. That's what he intended it to be. But somebody who has read it says it is also a biography. And there's some truth to that, I think. It shows his passion for and the keen interest really to the end of his life in the rocket technology.
Did he write any other memoir or autobiography, or is the book pretty much it?
He wrote an autobiography for his old school, the Nikolai-Schule, in, it was after 2000, probably 2002 or so. And he never finished it. He wrote to the time that he came to Huntsville, and then I think he wasn't able to do it anymore. So yes, he wrote a part autobiography.
Is that draft in the material you gave to the archives, or do you still have it? Or?
I believe it is in the archives material.
All right.
Yeah.
Very fine. Garrett was a good friend of Rudolf Herman, who mentions him several times in his memoirs. Can you tell us anything about the relationship between Gerhard and Rudolf Herman?
They were fairly close friends, I think through a mutual friend from way back, even before Peenemünde. Of course, they worked together at Peenemünde and then were separated for a number of years when Dr. Herman was in Minnesota. And then renewed their friendship when Dr. Herman moved to Huntsville, and were really close friends until he died. They, I think, had much in common as far as their work, but also in personal relationships and family relationships. It was really a very close, good relationship that they had.
Who were your father's other close friends?
Probably his closest friend was Willy Heibai, who also stems from before Peenemünde, and then also came to the United States but did not come to Huntsville until the early 60s. But from that time on, they were very close friends, and I think probably more outside the technical field than in, but that was his best friend.
Your father was an accomplished musician. Now, where did he study music, and how did he get into music?
He took up viola and violin very early. I think it was in his early teens. And had a certain gift for music. He played in a student orchestra while he was studying at Dresden. And then he never formally studied music at the college level or beyond, but kept it up throughout. After he left Berlin, it was probably more in the private sphere. He liked to play in string quartets. And that's what was picked up again in the United States, mostly with the other German scientists. He formed a quartet, and they played every week for many years. They never really performed, but they stuck together. And I'm not sure exactly when that was broken up, but then the Huntsville Chamber Music Guild was formed, and their focus was more on outside musicians. Although my father did play until probably his 80s or so.
For many years, you mentioned the Huntsville Chamber Music Guild. He was an officer of that guild.
Right.
Do you remember many things about his involvement in the guild?
Well, I was pretty young at the time, but I do remember when it was formed, and it would be the job of my sister and me to handle the mailings. They mailed out tickets at that time, and then the subscription or the concert check would come in the mail, and my sister and I would open the mail and record all the checks. So I remember that very vividly. And also some of the early concerts, which were certainly not of the quality that you have now, but it was quite something for Huntsville at the time.
One of the things your father did very religiously was to bring an autograph book to each of the concerts and get the artists to sign that autograph book. Do you still have that?
Yes, I found that among his belongings when we cleared out the house. And it was very interesting to look at.
Oh, I imagine it would be.
Lots of
Lots
names
of famous people.
that I was and wasn't familiar with, but that's a very significant thing.
Yes, you surely should be very proud to have that. Someday we might like to get a Xerox of that for the archives. It's one of the few good records that may exist of exactly what performers were here when.
Mm-hmm. Well, we'll certainly do that. Right now it's warehoused in our basement. We'll eventually get that out, and I'll be sure to get that to you.
I remember seeing him many times bringing it and being sure that he got the signatures of the musicians.
Yeah, that was a nice thing.
Another nice feature of the Chamber Music Guild was the receptions that they had afterwards, where your mother and some of the other German ladies would cook some delightful German pastries, and everybody enjoyed them after the concert.
You know, surprisingly, I don't remember those.
You don't remember those?
I don't know if I didn't go to them or what.
Well, they were immediately after the
Yeah.
concerts.
Yeah, I just don't.
And I know
recall them.
I watched your mother bring in some very fancy and delightful German pastries.
She could do well.
Oh, she was a wonderful cook, I know. Well, what kind of a father was Gerhard? Was he strict, or?
He was German.
He was German, all right. That's a good answer.
He was strict, he was autocratic. For many years, he was not terribly involved with his children. You know, his work was his life, along with the music. In later years, I came to appreciate him more for what he was. And we got, especially in his last years, we got very close. So he was somewhat shy, even though probably in his interactions, especially in his work arena, nobody would have thought that.
No, I would not have said he was shy.
Yeah. So, but I did find that later on, that was part of his character. And later on we had some very good conversations, and I think we got to understand each other much better. Part of the issue, at least for me, as far as my father was that I moved away as soon as I married, and for over 30 years there was very little personal interaction. But we caught up in the last few years.
Oh, that's delightful. Is there anything else you'd like to tell about your father that I may not have thought of asking? Do you have other hobbies? Or?
No, he really didn't. It was work and music. That was his whole life. Earlier on in the 50s and 60s, he tinkered with a lot of electrical things. I'll always remember that he built himself, down to the last little cathode or whatever you call it, his first phonograph.
Oh,
So he did that sort of thing. He never liked the outside. Hated gardening. His father had made him garden, so he hated to garden. But the electrical things, he was very interested in.
your mother was a remarkable woman. Would you like to say a few words about her?
Yes, she was. She was born in 1906 in Dresden, grew up there, went to the girls' schools in town, and then studied languages. She was in various places, as they did at that time. Probably her most remarkable feat was that she went to the Sorbonne for several semesters in Paris, and became a teacher, with very high ratings. And she taught for a year, then got married to my father, so she never went back to formal teaching. But once we came to Huntsville, she started teaching privately. And that was really her entry into the Society of Huntsville. And that was very nice. She had an English background, so she spoke the language well. And got to know some prominent people, actually, through Dr. von Braun's mother, who had started teaching while she was in Huntsville. And my mother took over some of her students. So she had quite a large number of private students, small groups also. And she also taught piano. She was highly proficient in piano as well. When she retired from her teaching, which was in her 60s, she got bored. And then she took up weaving, which she did for herself and for the senior center in Huntsville for a number of years. Met a lot of interesting people there. And she was very active. I mean, she insisted on taking her daily walk up into her early 90s, and remained very active mentally just until a year or two before she passed away.
She was a remarkable woman.
Yes.
Is there anything else you'd like to add to this interview? We've gone pretty quickly over large territory.
Well, just as far as I myself am concerned in this whole arena, it was not an easy life, being torn out of your homeland, as it was not for my parents. We integrated slowly, very slowly, into the American culture. I feel that I learned a lot of two cultures, and probably learned to pick out the best of both. Each has their good and bad sides, of course.
What school did you go to in Huntsville?
I went to Huntsville High School. And then I went to Vanderbilt for undergraduate medical school and all my subsequent training.
Very good.
And then moved to Minnesota.
Is there anything more you would like to add?
I don't believe so.
Anything that you would like to add? Her husband is sitting over here watching us.
No, I don't think so. I just feel as I've been lucky to be able to join this family, part of it.
Well, we thank you very much for coming here for the interview and for donating the extensive material from your father to the UAH archives.
Well, thank you for the opportunity for both.
They'll be a real resource for historians now and in the future, and we value that. Thank you very much.
I appreciate it. Thank you.